Hey guys, so it's nice to finally see your faces. Everyone looks a lot different than their freshman year pictures. My name is Faith, and I am doing my paper and project is on water relations with women in slums in India. So I'm gonna kind of go over an overview of how water is related to women in India, what the kind of systems in place are, how it really impacts women, and then kind of go over what scholarship I'm analyzing it through and kind of just the frameworks of which I'm doing. So just kind of first and foremost, um, India with a lot of population, a country with a lot of population, has a lot of slums, and within those slums, there's a lot of issues with just kind of water in general, water and sanitation. So and this is kind of true in a lot of global south countries in general. Just water is a scarcer resource than in global north countries, just kind of due to inadequate infrastructure, natural environment barriers, unnatural environment degradation. And that's just kind of a few reasons why there is global inequality and why slums kind of face the brunt of water inequality. This is definitely true in a lot of Indian cities, especially the major ones. There's lots of slums, and within that, women are really placed with the brunt of inadequate water, and they're kind of so kind of how it works is that women are responsible for obtaining water for their families, and that's kind of and again, it's all on average. This can't be placed to every family in India in a slum, but they are facing challenges to water to find working. They have to find access to water. And kind of a quote from a study about women in India in slums with water was that Indian cities have to face the challenges of staying, and women in Indian cities have to face the challenges of staying back from work to access water, walking miles in search of sanitation, and procuring water from illegal and informal sources. End quote. They're often blamed for poor conditions. They face economic disadvantages and then can also be criminalized for informal practices of water. So kind of some laying out some informal practices of water, of obtaining water is from slumlords. They deal in water sometimes. So that's a way that they can be criminalized later, which is kind of a really unfortunate um, reality. There's lots of back deals, which is a big issue. But essentially, women just they're put the responsibility of getting water is put on their shoulders, but they're also blamed for the lack of water. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Um, yeah, so pretty much to sum that up, women are othered in this scenario, like what we've kind of language that we've used a lot in this class. They're othered um, by obtaining water, and then also because there's the suppliers of water in slums, but simultaneously blamed for the poor conditions and increased degradation. Um, and then women are just kind of viewed as a population that's less worthy, so they don't have the political voice, um, and that provides more barriers to political and socioeconomic empowerment. That could kind of alleviate some of the issues with water in these slums since they don't have that agency. That's really difficult to do that. So, and just another part is sanitation, which is part of water that I briefly touch on. That there's a lot of issues with that as well, and that even in instances where they're granted better sanitation, which again involves water, that they're not, um, that there's such deep ingrained ideas about how women should be acting in society that's difficult for them to use different methods that might be more sustainable or better in the long term. So that's kind of just a breakdown of how water and sanitation works. What I focus on a lot in my essay and what ends up lending a hand to which lens, ecofeminist lens that I pick, that I've picked to kind of analyze it through, is the impact on colonialism in India. So what I kind of introduce is how colonial patriarchy in British colonial India has impacted the Indian landscape, both physically and culturally, and has lasted past the explicit removal of British presence. And then I use that to kind of explain why women's relationship with water in Indian slums should be looked at from a socialist ecofeminist lens. Sorry, it's like a mouthy phrase. But yeah, so what I kind of argue is that um, the emergence of like British colonialism in India brought the idea that women, this is in quotes, women, colored people, colonies, and the socially and material underprivileged peoples are undeserving of being granted agency. So since this was a practice in colonial British India, that it made it kind of so there's a very deeply ingrained sense of patriarchy, of colonialism, which is inherently a patriarchal um, agenda and policy. And just kind of like the very nature of colonialism privileges white male Western elites, or a combination of those. And when you privilege a population that already possesses the economic and political power, Indian women can become further marginalized because they're not the nationality or race of the population that was in power. And at the very least, they're not the population that, or the gendered population that is in power and that kind of demands power. Um, Another important aspect that I talked about is how colonialism has transitioned into neocolonialism, neoliberalism, which are all societal constructions that are also patriarchal in nature. So although we don't have colonialism, we have neoliberalism, we have neocolonialism, we have the market economies that promote globalization, but they also promote supplying the global north countries, not the global south countries. So you kind of just like have that cycle of patriarchal institutions. These institutions often put economic prosperity ahead of individual rights, environmental health, inequality, increased equality of marginalized populations, including women. So what I focused on was socialist ecofeminism as a lens to view this, and why I think it's so important is because a lot of the other lenses really don't talk about colonialism and imperialism. And I think this is so crucial to India and a lot of other global South countries, but especially India, because um, they had one of the strongest and longest legacies of colonialism. It was really underneath um, the power of England or Britain, and just kind of how that's really a distinct marker in this case. So, a few things that or a few people who I pulled um, scholarship from as kings. An important quote that I had is that from is the that there's just that women are perceived as being closer to nature. They are just as much a part of nature as the rest of the community, whereas the achievement of manhood seems to be entirely dependent upon men distancing themselves from that fact. So that kind of puts into place that just kind of putting ecofeminism on a whole, that women are looked at in societal roles and that men have the power, and therefore they're able to kind of continue these societal constraints. Another important person I looked at was this woman, Carl I think that's how you pronounce her last name. And she really focuses on how that social ecofeminists are concerned with the systems of domination such as capitalism, patriarchal, and imperialism that are ecologically destructive, end quote. And kind of explains ecofeminism in a way that is really easy to understand. Kind of says that social ecofeminists are explicitly anti-capitalist, and that they understand very distinctly that women's relation to nature, capital, and labor is constructed differently than men's relationship, which is exactly kind of the case in these slums where women's capital is not being counted, their labor is being kind of pushed underneath the table and not recognized. They're not getting compensation from it. It's taking away from their other prospects. It's very arduous tasks, and it's just, women uh, do not receive like the monetary gains from their intensive labor, but then have to commit like tons of time for it, which is really big. And then in the rest of my paper, it's stuff that I kind of need to develop a little bit more in the coming days, is I contrasted cultural ecofeminism as how it could be looked at from this point of view, but how socialist ecofeminist lens is a lot better. And I'm going to kind of develop that a little bit more. And that's kind of my framing for this and the topic that I chose. Yeah, look forward to hearing your guys' thoughts about it and look forward to listening to your guys'. Thanks a lot.